Welcome to the latest Land of 10 Iowa Facebook Live session. I am Bobby LaJess. Alongside me is Scott Dochman. As always, people, feel free to throw the questions your way. We'll answer them. I imagine we'll get plenty of football questions, football recruiting questions, basketball, maybe even some wrestling questions headed our way. Scott, anything you want to tackle first before the questions start flowing in?
Well, we were just at the monthly Presidential Committee on Athletics meeting, and a couple of things that came up I thought was interesting and interesting timing. Well, number one, Scott Southmaid, who handles a lot of the internal recruiting, he's been there since he was an intern about 15 years ago. Gave a little bit of an update on recruiting. I think specifically mentioning that 2 to 3 spots are left. I thought that was interesting. And then also we got a little more of an update on the North End Zone project. We got to see it from the inside, not just the outside. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Other than that, football-wise, I mean, basketball, there's been a lot of interest and stuff, but football-wise, we're still kind of scraping as much as we can right now.
Yeah, Scott kind of officially said the Indy kids are committed for anybody who's still worried about that. He said 19 of them have signed. I'm sorry, I meant signed, not committed. 19 people signed, so if you kind of do the math on everything, that's basically they got 20 people if you include Davion Nixon, who are part of this, and kind of we were talking about that before we got on here. Our assumption was they just didn't include him on that. And so I think that solves anybody's worries or thoughts or questions, and it's close to a definitive answer as you can get. In regard to that, in a week's time anyway, it won't matter anyway because they'll officially be announced as part of the class because the 7-on-7 team they're part of will have had their signing day ceremony, and everyone on that team will have signed, and so then Iowa doesn't have to hold back that information anymore. So that was the big reason. An issue with everything there. So not too much wild stuff on the recruiting front of Scott outside of that, but it's Iowa. There's been a slow month for really weird. They've still got those 2 to 3 people that's there. And Don says the wide receiver and linebacker commits coming.
Well, with Jaden McDonald, we'll know Monday night.
Yeah, technically nobody's that's not commits right now. They're just players they're after. And Miller, the other linebacker, is visiting Florida State this weekend. When you're going against Florida State, I don't think you ever like your odds, especially with the kid in state from there.
Yeah.
He hasn't announced when he'll make his decision, but I don't think it'll last too far beyond Sunday or Monday. But McDonald, I think, is the one you think you're in the best spot in. Iowa's one of 4 finalists. I think really them and Mississippi are your front runners. Purdue came out of left field. I don't even know how to gauge them. They're a wild card at this point because the family went from Iowa to Purdue to visit the school, and so it was kind of, I don't want to say a drive-by visit because it was really quick. It came out of left field, but that's kind of what happened there. He's visiting Mississippi this weekend. So I think if you're Iowa, you've got to like your odds. You're not going to have huge numbers. I said last week I'd put it in the 30 percentile range somewhere because you're probably looking at Mississippi there and maybe Purdue holding similar numbers. But that's kind of where I sit there. I don't really think anyone has a great idea of where he's going to end up, McDonald, but I think if you're Iowa, that's the guy you want. Most of all because he looks like an ideal fit for the Leo spot.
Yeah, and they could use somebody. I mean, they have right now Nick Niemann is probably that position. Barrington Wade will compete, but I think it's Nick Niemann's job unless somebody comes in as a safety hybrid. But, we'll get to more of those questions when they get to the spring practices and can kind of see a legitimate depth chart and probably talk to Kirk Ferentz about it. So North End Zone project is on its way. All of the seats will be in place. The club will not be for the fall. That'll be, they'll chop the capacity down a little bit, but everybody kind of knew that. They don't know exactly how many seats. It could be 69,512 or 69,510, just depending on the width of a row or 2 or 3. So, it looks like it'll be a pretty cool project once it's completed, and it'll keep more sound in Kinnick, and that's always helpful for the home team.
Yeah.
So Scott asked, who is the head of recruiting? Kirk Ferentz.
Actually, yeah.
But I guess you start with the recruiting coordinator on the coaching staff, and that's Kelvin Bell. On the other side, you would go with more Tyler Barnes as kind of the recruiting director. Scott Southmaid has responsibilities there, and then of course all the coaches themselves are heavily involved. So
there's recruiting's become a spot where it's not just like the one coach who's the head of recruiting, and that's it. And you might have somebody on the staff, non-football side, who does a little bit of that in January, December, early February. You have multiple people whose jobs basically mean something recruiting related. Because Scott's is player personnel or something like that. Tyler's is director of scouting, and so it's kind of like when you look at big companies, you can't necessarily tell what someone's doing based off of the title itself. You just know the general field of what they're doing. But it's now gotten to the point where you have multiple people whose whole job is recruiting, and it's not as a coach. And every staff in, frankly, the Big Ten Power 5 programs have multiple people like that where their job is basically recruiting 24/7, and they have nothing to do with what happens on the field.
Scott still owes me one because a couple of years ago I wrote a story about how Iowa lagged behind, didn't have a player personnel director and all of that. And within 3 months, they completely revamped their department, and he was one of them. It just kind of shifted all these roles. So he owes me some scoops coming up in the future.
He should have owed you for several years.
Yeah.
You were missing out on that. Don says he thanks for the appreciation and comments. Well, thanks for the questions, Don, and all the comments, too. We appreciate those. Bud says, what about the linebacker from Florida? Did he visit last weekend? Yes, Miller is his name. He visited, and as we said earlier, he's visiting Florida State this weekend. Florida State came in with an offer last Tuesday. I think it was 4 or 5 days before he visited. Iowa State, I wouldn't be too confident in Iowa landing a player from Florida who's now picked up a Florida State offer at the last minute. Power program, blue blood, and it's in state.
Yeah.
And if they land him, it would probably be their best recruiting coup in this class, even though he wouldn't be the top-rated player from there. So if you get him, great, but I wouldn't kind of expect it when his decision comes some point next week.
If I was to make a guess, and that's kind of based on some of what we heard today, is there's going to be another stealth guy. There's going to be Tuesday night. Tuesday sometime they're going to offer somebody that's out of nowhere. It could be a preferred walk-on, but chances are it's going to be somebody who is, that they've eyed lately, that maybe on their way to UNI. And they've had some great ones over the years. George Kittle was that way. Brandon Myers was that way. The list goes on of guys that they pick up a day before signing day, and then they turn out to be really good players.
And I don't think it might even be Tuesday with this class. If they know by Monday that they've lost one of the linebackers, I think they could pull a trigger on something like that Sunday or Monday. There's no official visitor for this weekend scheduled for Iowa as a known person with a scholarship offer, but it's Iowa. They bring kids in all the time. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a kid that's coming in this weekend. Not that nobody knows about, but hasn't made much headway with anything, and partially because the kid doesn't have a scholarship offer yet, where the kid's already come, the kid's visited, and all of a sudden they know they're out, then they go to him next man up. Or they go to, like Scott said, somebody who's a walk-on, whether it's somebody who's in this class or somebody who's been in the program for a while who then gets it. I think they know what they're doing, and they're just being really Iowa about it and just being coy and playing it to the vest and letting things play out with those two linebackers. I think those guys are far and away a tier of themselves, their top two options for those final scholarship spots. And I think everybody else is in a lower tier. Maybe call them tier A, everybody else would be tier B. And when they have to attack tier B, I think they're confident that they'll land the people they want there. So there's no reason for them to do anything but let this kind of play out.
Right. Let's see, what do we got here? Steve asks about the field for recruiting going forward in the 19 class, key targets and best bets. Obviously, they've spent a lot of time on 19, this month, regardless of what they're trying to tell you behind the scenes. When you've got that kind of hay in the barn, per se, let's use an Iowa analogy, then you got to go after 19. And one guy I'll talk about, because I'm going to try to get to see, is Jarrell Brock. He's a running back from Quincy, Illinois, has amazing tape, very good athlete, about 2 hours south of Iowa City on the Mississippi River. I think he's a guy that that they've put on a full court press for, and I do know that the head coach really likes.
Yeah, they've thrown out a lot of offers with 19 recently, which will be interesting to see what happens there when they can go back evaluating back on the road in March, host kids for a junior day later this winter. When you're sitting at this point right now, a lot of it is location matters, which is why the 3 commits they currently have are all in the area. 2 Iowa kids, 1 kid from Illinois. You have the quarterback from Council Bluffs, I was going to say Western Iowa, in Max Dugan, who is a key priority there. You have the running back Scott mentioned from Illinois, who's a key priority there. They've offered a lot of kids. They've offered a couple, something like 21 kids, I think, since January 21st, and all but like 4 of them are 2019 kids. So the pool there has significantly grown. They offered a couple of defensive ends that could be intriguing. The position group I'm kind of interested in watching for is wide receiver. And there's no one name that stands out there right now because it's kind of been, they've just been throwing out offers there. And it's hard to see who of those kids is really interested in Iowa, who the recruitment's basically going to stop because the kid's going to go, yeah, I like the offer, but I'm going to go elsewhere. And so they know that's a position where they need better play, they need better production. And, you know, a large part of that is bringing in better players. And so they've thrown a lot of offers out in 19, in 20, and in 21 to players in that class. So I'm interested to see what happens there in the next several months and as it unfolds as much as any other probably position group.
Yeah, and I would also say that linebacker Jack Campbell from Cedar Falls is going to be a huge push because they obviously we're seeing it right now. They need linebackers. That's not going to end with this class. They're going to look to the future, and especially somebody that's just an hour and a half up the road.
Yeah, Zach Watson, who's the lead recruiter for McDonald, and we also have another question on Blake about where things kind of sit with him. Don't worry about missing it, Blake. I was one of 4 finalists for him. Purdue, who kind of is a wild card, came out on the field. They got a visit on Monday after he left Iowa. That was where McDonald went. Mississippi, Kansas State, and also obviously Iowa. The kid will announce Monday. If you're Iowa, you have to think you're sitting in a pretty decent spot, but I don't think there's a front runner there with any of it. It'll be interesting to see what happens Monday there. And to get back to the lead recruiter, Seth Wallace has been down there a bunch since Iowa offered him in end of December. I know he was down there yesterday. Mississippi was also down there yesterday, which is really interesting. It's like a coaching turnstile from the McDonald household. And he also visited earlier in the month with Kirk Ferentz. Phil Parker was there with him yesterday. So he's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting, I think, with him and everything with his recruitment.
Yeah. All right, what do we got here? Let's see. Scott asks, what is Iowa's policy when it pertains to recruiting kids? If they offer a kid, do they tell the kid not to verbal with another school, or they will pull their scholarship offer, even for legacy recruits? It's a little more complicated than that, but I mean, here's if they offer them, they'll offer whoever. They'll offer kids who are committed to other schools. Famously, you were on the other side for this one, Al Lazard.
Yeah,
who Iowa could have used the last 4 years.
Yes.
And Paul Rhodes blew up.
I was not a fan of that.
Yeah, and he was a legacy of another school. But they'll offer him. But now if Iowa, let's take it from the other side. Let's say the linebacker from Michigan, Ben, I can't remember.
Van Summerin or Sumerin?
Yeah. He was committed to Iowa. Michigan came in with an offer. He wanted to visit. Iowa's scholarship offers basically say, look, once you're committed, you're committed. You're married. You have the ring on your finger. And if you want to go visit somewhere else, then you can leave. And that's pretty much what happened. And he wanted to go to Michigan anyway, so it wasn't
Michigan kid, home state school. It made perfect sense. I'm actually in the middle of writing something right now that'll run all the decommitments in this class. If Michigan doesn't come in, Ben ends up at Iowa. There's no doubt about it. That's probably the only program that would have offered him that he would have considered all that for. And they go back to the kind of verbal, to the offering kids, and not to then, we extend you an offer, you can't verbal anywhere else. Programs really can't do that because they don't have the kind of negotiating ability with the recruits to be able to do that. There's some programs that I've had kids who have committed and enrolled at Iowa have told me they'll get scholarship offers from certain programs where it goes, okay, but this offer is only on the table for 48 hours or something like that. And that happens a lot of time with kids who are like juniors, not so much when they're senior class, but earlier on, just so they can kind of have somebody in a position group or things like that. And some kids don't take too kindly to that because, as you would imagine, if you're a kid who's like, imagine if you're a junior right now and you get told that in like February or January now, you want to visit, you want to go elsewhere. It doesn't feel like a real offer there. I've had recruits tell me Iowa would kind of pull those kind of punches with them. It's kind of on the table. The thing Iowa does, though, is what Scott brought up is, okay, if you're committed to us and go elsewhere, that's kind of a big no-no, and we're going to have a lot of problems 80% of the time. There's things you can kind of work around it if you're a big enough recruit or if you're a recruit that has a good enough relationship with Iowa. There's been a couple kids that have made visits elsewhere after being committed to Iowa. So, but for the most part, it's a big no-no there, and that's just how it goes. Don says Doyle's son looks like a beast. We both kind of agree with you on that. We both think he has a really good shot of playing year one. Iowa's having to replace all three linebackers, so it's going to be a wide open competition. Anybody that shows the ability to step in, be able to make plays, understand the defense, will have a shot to play. Dylan Doyle is known. He's a really athletic kid. Throw that out there, but he's known for being high football intellect. And so that comes from having a dad who's been on Ferentz' staff for all those years. Yeah. And so he enrolls early. He'll get to know the defense. You throw it all together with him. I think at a minimum, he's a kid who plays right away, who is second team on the depth chart, ends up playing some special team reps. I think that's kind of the floor for him, I think, this season.
Right. Let's see, Iowa in it for Massey now that he's decommitted from ISU. Sorry if you discussed it.
Yeah, I think they will because his offer list wasn't really high. I don't know the exact number before he ended up committing to Iowa State. That's another one of those wide receivers that we could be talking about
right?
in a future class. I think so. And so I think what they're going to do there is, if the kid's interested, they'll go back in. Now, that's kind of everybody, just because a kid commits doesn't mean coaches stop talking to a kid, which is another thing too. And so if there's interest, I think Iowa will go back there. No doubt about it. I think you don't start from square one again on it, but it's almost like you're resetting things, kind of like when if you reset a video game.
Yeah.
It would kind of serve like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if you end up seeing a visit coming out of that at some point down the road.
Right. Pat asks about stealing the receiver, Iowa City receiver from MSU. And then he's corrected, of course. He went to Michigan. Oliver Martin, I have not heard word one that he might leave there. I mean, obviously, I think he's redshirted this year. He did. And I still think, it's understandable why he picked Michigan, but every year now he's going to be battling for playing time. So we'll see what happens with Oliver. He's a really good kid, and I guess we wish him well.
Yeah, that's the interesting kind of thing that's an interesting level of in-state recruiting where you get the kid who is in the backyard of one of the two Power 5 programs here, and it comes down to them in blue blood. It's not always easy to win those battles. Iowa lost it with Oliver Martin. They won it with Tristan Wirfs. Even though he committed a long time ago, Alabama came on him really late. They won it with Wagner in this class. Virtually everyone and their brother offered him. Now, they all weren't around when he ended up committing in December, but Iowa had to fight off some teams on him too. So that's one of those ones where it's tough because when you enter that territory, I don't think if you're Iowa, you're as confident as you are that you're going to land the in-state kid as you are in a spot where it's just regional recruiting, where it's maybe you in Nebraska or Minnesota and Iowa State thrown in there or Missouri. When it hits that level of recruiting, that's when you kind of have to worry that you never know what's going to happen. And if a kid's swayed by the power name, you could lose him.
Well, they've ran into trouble. Ross Piersbacher, went to Alabama. He was committed to Iowa and then went to Alabama. You saw Amara Darbo leave the West Des Moines area for Michigan. Michigan seems to come in and grab Iowa's best receivers out of the state. So that seems to be the biggest issue. Ohio State hasn't been here yet, although Max Duggan could make it one.
They are. They've offered him Urban visit him at the school some point in January.
That's what I mean. Yeah. They haven't snagged anybody yet. But let's see here. He says he wishes Oliver would have picked Iowa. Here's why. I understand why, but if he's going to college to be a wide receiver, he wants to be coached by good wide receivers. And we saw what Iowa's receiving core was like in 2016, and it was NG, not good.
Bad position to have the best player in the class for Iowa that year, because it just looked bad. You didn't know what the position was going to be like. The position coach ends up getting let go, which was kind of, it wasn't a surprise to anybody who was being recruited by Iowa that that's the way it played out. So it was a position of need, but a lot of the things that just circumstances of that year didn't help them when it came to landing him. Grant says, will Stanley keep his starting position this upcoming season? Yeah, the only way Nate Stanley doesn't start is if he gets hurt.
Yeah.
I don't want to, go that road with it, but that's the only way it's going to happen. Iowa loves what they have in him. He put together, I think, a better sophomore season than most people realize. It's rare for someone who is making their first season starting, especially as an underclassman, to play and make as few mistakes as he does on reading plays or on identifying who the ball has to go to. He did that at an alarmingly high rate. It was really impressive for what he did. And I know a lot of fans don't like the deep ball that he threw. I think that's kind of was overblown and some other things with him. But if that's the baseline for what you have for the season you can get from him, you're going to get growth out of him the next 2 years. I think that tells you have a really good quarterback in the pipeline for, his junior and senior year coming up.
He had 26 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. 26 is the second most in Iowa history. Chuck Long had 27. And, had, that last pass not been called back, to the 1-inch line, he would have had it. So I think that's he's right there. I mean, he's had a great year. I think if he would have been 16-6, I think that would have been a very good year for a sophomore quarterback, considering I think the most from James Vandenberg's 25 to this year was 18 maybe by Jake Rudock. So I think he's really he's in a great position, and a lot of those deep balls were the receiver's faults too. Everybody looks at the quarterback, but it was on the receiver. Not some of them were his, but I would say at least a third were on the receiver.
First half of the year more was him. Second half of the year I think it went to more. It ended up being on the receivers for the most part. Jeff wants to know if Wagner from basketball is a real possibility for football. I know you wrote a little bit of piece on that this week, so I'll let you dive in there.
Yeah, I know a lot of people seem to think I'm writing too much about it. Second story, and this one was just basically because I had a chance to talk to him about it, and I think there is some possibilities here. I mean, he's not playing a whole lot in basketball. He understands that football is his best sport. He was terrific and as a senior in high school, and so I think there's a chance there. And if he does take that step athletically, he's the best one. Now, it's going to take him some time to learn the nuance of the position, so it might just be him out there running fade routes. But you know what? If you're 6'6", 6'7", and you can run a fade and a slant, and that's it, do it. He's and I know a lot of people talk about tight end. It'd take him too long to learn that.
Yeah, it's
this level.
I think it probably is the right move for him to do, but I fall in the camp of I'll see it when I believe it, just because it could have happened so many times and it hasn't yet. It's one of those things that I just don't think will ever end up really happening. Brian wants to know, any sleepers out of New Jersey still out there? None that I was offered. And I would be surprised if that was kind of the path they went down to round out this class. I know they got Amir Smith-Marset on signing day last year, and Akram Wadley was an end of the process kind of guy. But it doesn't but you knew Amir Smith last year was sitting out there, that they were after him. They were in on him. This year, once you get past those linebackers, there's no names, which is why I think whatever happens if they don't land those two goes stealth mode, because you normally at least have an idea of what's going on. It was the same thing with Nate Whelan last year when they lost the linebacker.
Thomas Johnston.
Yes, that was his name, to UAB. You knew what Nate Whelan was their backup plan. They had been talking to him. There was talk of an official visit coming in even before they offered him. So you at least knew who the options were. This year, you don't know who the options are. Yeah. So it's a little harder to do, which also why I would think if it happens, it's probably somebody in state or somebody who's connected to the program in some way, shape, or form.
Here's an issue with that. Frank Verducci was one who helped them get both those players. Now he works for Nebraska as an analyst. So, so there's right now, they need to reconnect out there. But, Ken O'Keefe, that's where his territory is. He's good in that eastern area, and so he'll have to make those connections.
Yeah, what do we have next? Patrick says, Odd McDonald chooses Iowa. I've been in the camp putting it somewhere about 30 to 35% for the last few weeks. may seem low, but I don't think I'd put anybody else at a higher level. Maybe Mississippi slightly higher than that because they got the last visit and the way recruiting tends to play out. If you have the first one, that's a good one. You can land them, but if you don't, you want to be the one who has them last. So I think Iowa and Mississippi, but Purdue's a wild card. I don't know how to gauge that because they kind of jumped in there last week, and you have Kansas State there too. So if you're Iowa, I think you like the odds, but I don't think you can enter Monday feeling overly confident that you're going to land him.
Yeah. Exactly. Ron brings up punting as a concern and Iowa's inability to flip the field after a stalled drive. Yeah, it is. It's huge for a ground acquisition team like Iowa that's running based and you want to play off your defense. Ryan Gersonde, was a scholarship punter last year and he was hurt. He had a 42-yard average as a freshman. Only played in a couple of games. I think he's a guy that if you can get him healthy, will be your guy. And I think he would have been the guy. Otherwise, I'd go with more Nate Stanley. But as they've shown, they're very reluctant to do that other than quick punt.
Yeah, I think if Ryan's healthy, I think that'll smooth over and solve a lot of the punting issues from this past season. But we'll have to see what happens with him, health, and everything seen there in the spring. Grant wants to know who we think steps up and fills the shoes of Vandenberg. Heck, you could pick almost anybody out of the position group to end up doing it. I think Nick Easley you'll see continually play a solid role there. And then I think it's take your pick of the guys who are freshmen this year really will be – you can make a great argument for virtually anybody in that class to be somebody who steps up and has – I don't want to say breakout year, but shows significant progress from year 1 to year 2 in the system.
I think you look at, out of the 3 freshmen who are in that group, Brandon Smith is more of a true X. He's taller, he's longer, so he's not really in the Vandenberg mold, but, he could have that kind of production. Ihmir Smith-Marsette's probably is faster than Vandenberg even was before he broke his foot. So he's, more of a streaky guy. Build-wise, Cooper's probably more like Vandenberg. Same thing with Easley. So I would say those 2 are probably more in that line because Vandenberg was a really good possession receiver before his injury. You could tell the speed wasn't quite the same last year. So I think they've got a chance, and possibly some of the incoming guys too.
Yeah, any of them make really good. You can make a really good argument for any of those guys doing anything. The one thing I will say is if Ihmir Smith-Marsette learns how to hold on to the football when he catches it, he probably has the easiest path to making a big impact on the offense because they used him as their downfield vertical threat this year, and they'll use him in the same role this past year.
Right.
So he probably would be the biggest, best odds to be able to do it, but any of the others could easily do it as well. Scott says he wishes Cooper could develop into a Hinkle kind of type. Scott believes the best teams had that type of wide receiver who's also a good punt in the good punt return game. Fan favorite type guy, somebody to jumpstart things to get a drive. Interesting name there with that is Samson Evans, an incoming freshman. Hinkle's the exact name Kirk Ferentz used to describe him. I believe Samson is 6 foot, 6'1", somewhere in that territory. Quarterback out of high school, his team ran basically the triple option, and so he's an athlete. You're going to have to develop him a little bit at wide receiver, but lo and behold, the punt game stuff. He returned kicks. He returned punts. He returned a big one for his team to win a second consecutive state title this year. So everything you kind of brought up there, I don't know if he'll become that kind of player, but he has the tools to kind of fit that kind of mold for Iowa.
Yeah, Evans, Cooper, Roman Ochoa, who you brought up also along with Hinkle. They were, that was a spark plug, tough, hard-nosed guys who could make things happen. Yeah, I think they could develop into that. Easley's probably another one, maybe not quite as dynamic in speed. Hinkle was tough, tenacious, scored 4 touchdowns in his finale in 2005. So I think they've got a chance there to do that, but they still got some work to do. This is an important spring for the wide receiver core. Last year was ground zero. It was the worst you'll ever have at that position. They had 2 scholarship guys on the field in the spring. Adrian Falconer, who's no longer with the program now, and Devontae Young, who barely played, at least in that position. Nick Easley kind of emerged, but I think this year they'll be considerably better. And I think, with also other guys coming in, Nico Regini.
Yeah, who's already here.
Yeah, so I think they'll have a chance to make some strides this spring and this summer and, because a lot of these guys have been on campus for more than a year.
Yep. Mike wants to know who breaks out at running back this year, and I agree with Jim, who commented in the comments on there, Ivory Kelly Martin will be the breakout. So I don't know if breakout's the right word, because he'll probably be splitting carries with Young, but he's the one who's going to have the Akram Wadley type of highlight runs where he's more likely with his breakaway speed to put together a 60-yard touchdown or have a juke that's going to make you go wow, and you're going to want to see it on social media or see a gif of it come up somewhere. The fans naturally gravitate to that person as opposed to the guy who does a little bit more running between the tackles and running over people. Unless you lay a really big hit, it's hard for that kind of running back to generate the same kind of excitement in the fan base as somebody who can just boom, gone 60 yards, that's a touchdown. So I think that's the one the fans will gravitate towards.
Yeah, it's just like a lot of people didn't like LaShawn Daniels as much as they did Akram Wadley, because Wadley, could really take off, and Daniels was more of your thunder type pack, and I think they're both equally productive. They both had 10 touchdowns that year. So I think those two are the odds-on favorites to kind of split carries. I want to see what Henry Guile does out of Green Bay when he comes in. I also want to see Keyshawn Bryant, a guy from Florida who didn't play last year, is hurt and stuff. I'd like to see what he can do, because this, as we know, this is Iowa football. You're going to need at least 3 running backs, if not 4. So I want to see who's down the list. Tokes, with a health issue, I don't think you count on him right now. So.
No, it's Iowa. You'll need them. That's why they always bring in at least one every class.
Yeah.
Depth matters.
So a couple others here. We've got who's the next All-American from Patrick? Who's the next All-American at DB?
I'd go Hankins. I don't know if it'll be this year, but he's a natural corner. He's got the size of Josh Jackson. I wouldn't want to put pressure on him. I don't know if he'll get there, but he brings the skill set that you want there, and he looks to be the kind of guy Iowa wants to be one of their shutdown corners, and that's where they've had success with the All-American stuff there. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being him.
Hard to call him an All-American, but I'll say All Big Ten because they've had so many of these. I'm going to go the slightly different direction, and Amani Hooker. I think he could be, a thunderous, strong safety. He's big, he's physical, he's fast. He's shown it. He's had a pick 6 and against Ohio State. So, I think, just for the sake of saying somebody's different, that's where I would go.
Yeah.
So.
Zach wants to know how many true freshmen do we think will play this season. I haven't gone over the depth chart and everybody at all yet to have a really good answer on that, but I think its safe bet would be 6 to 8. It might be higher by the time we're all said and done, but I think that's a safe number to throw out there right now in January.
They've had 10 each of the last 2 years. A little bit unusual that you'd have a defensive end and a tackle play as a true freshman. I'll go down a little bit. I'll say something like 8. I think they're just going to continue to infuse talent. You look at linebacker, I wouldn't be surprised if 2 or 3 freshman linebacker play right away. Number one, to get them on the field, because you just don't know what you have right now in your juniors and seniors. Dylan Doyle being at the very top of the list. Jaden McDonald, if he commits, I think he plays right away. There could be a couple others, and defensive backs, there might be 1 or 2 or 3.
And that's from a pure talent standpoint. Guys are coming back. That DB class is just that good.
One of the things that they do is, at a lot of those positions are, if they think you're going to be a chance to compete for a starting spot the next year, they will throw you out there as a freshman, at a position where you can hit. So, all right, you're a safety on special teams. You're running down the field because you're going to get some tackles. The game's not going to be too big for you. But whereas if you're maybe a center, they don't really do that as often. Tristan Wirfs was a special case. He was that good.
He's the rare guy. I think Scott's right. Linebacker and DBs are where you're going to look, and because it's Iowa and they need playmakers, if anyone shows ability to do it at wide receiver, they'll play. Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's a true freshman, a walk-on, or somebody else, which is, as they showed last year, the walk-on easily led the team in receptions, and Amir Smith-Marset earned a lot of playing time.
And running back.
Yeah, always running back because it's the easiest position to play as a true freshman day one. And that's irregardless of the opening as the starting spot there. Joel says, do we really Josh says, see a safety playing Leo? I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they do. against the spread teams in the Big Ten. You're Nebraska, now that Frost is there. You're Purdue, that they'll slide someone in there and make it a true like NFL-style nickel package, where that's kind of the hybrid guy that a lot of teams go to. I covered Iowa State for almost a decade in the Big 12, and so many teams in that league basically turned a linebacker into that position. And it was basically somebody who was a safety who had the size of that, who could tackle in the box, but also had the speed to cover like a cornerback. There's not a lot of guys that can do that. They're rare, but that league, which is overrun by the spread, kind of went that route years ago. I think Iowa will do that. They won't do it against Wisconsin, teams like that, but I think you'll see them substitute that package in a little bit more when you see those spots, because it's the best way to match up with those kind of teams.
Now, when they've had Chris Kirksey, or I would even say Ben Niemann, that their skill set was conducive to play in both a hybrid role. They could play slam ball all day and night, but they also could cover tight ends and slot receivers if needed, especially in the zone. So they didn't need that, extra D-back for that position. Now, what I would see it is if they decide, if whoever's playing out there isn't good enough in pass coverage, is it quick enough? Now, if it's Nick Niemann, he's just as big and just as fast as his brother.
Allegedly, he's more athletic. Yeah. That's what everybody in the program says.
And I remember his video from when he came in, I thought, okay, this guy's better than his brother. So if that's the case, then you really don't need that unless, and this is what they should have done last year, but they didn't have enough defensive backs to make it happen. Yeah. Slide your Leo inside and and have him play next to your Mike on and then have a 50 back in there for him. Should have done that last year.
You could almost, it's getting really complex, but you could almost make the Leo play the strong side at that point and move the safety down, because that probably with your personnel group fits better, but that also then requires your Leo to play two positions, which probably isn't that feasible with everyone you have at that position group. On an average basis.
And what they did with nickel last year was they removed the weak side linebacker, which was Bo Bauer, and stick in an extra back. And I'd expect that to be kind of the case, because you want speed, but you also want to have at least one other thumper on the field in case you needed him. I only saw him play one time. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. 7 DBs on one play. And that was the last play of the game against, I can't remember which one it was. Illinois, maybe? I don't know.
I was weird. That was the Big 12. That was just common. And write it down. It's just Iowa in the league they play in versus Iowa State in the league they play in. It's amazing the differences just solely because of that. Mike comes in and says the Stanley have an All-American type year this year. Not possible without major growth from the wide receivers. His statistical numbers were really good this year. They might be able to grow, but how impressive they were from the touchdown to INT ratio is going to be hard to duplicate without the wide receivers' growth. He himself can improve and help his completion percentage, because that ended up below 60%. 60% is the number you want there. He can do things there, but to put up the kind of campaign you need to fall under All-American, you have to have huge numbers, because you have to remember he's good, All-American. He's going against quarterbacks who put up huge numbers in those spread offenses where 4,000 passing yards, you plug and play quarterbacks and they produce those numbers every year. So there's going to be anywhere from 2 to 4 quarterbacks on the national level who play in that type of offense, who are going to play on top 15 teams, that teams have a shot at making the playoffs, or they have a shot at the Heisman, and that's who he's going to have to compete against to do it. And so for that to happen, the passing game has to become more efficient, and that falls back on the receivers.
Yeah, I mean, if he goes from 26-6 to 30-4, Iowa's going to have to get to the Big Ten championship game and be in the top 10 for him to get any looks. I think his completion percentage does have to go up, but I would say so. I would say, does he have a chance to be first team All Big Ten? And I would go yes there. I think the All American is, and this is an open and shut case, is Noah Fant. He's going to be an All-American, and he'll be your next guy declaring for the NFL draft.
He has a really good shot on it, because that's a tough position to find people at.
Yeah.
And there's some places that when they put together their All-American ballot, factor heavily the ability to block and catch. They don't want guys that just are glorified receivers there. And Iowa naturally sets itself up to, if they have a good tight end, who can do that. Fumagalli in Wisconsin did both this year, and that's why you saw him on a lot of those lists as a first or second team guy, because he could block and he could also catch passes, and that matters especially to old school voters. And so, that's if you could bet on that, that'd be a good one, because whatever the odds are for Noah Fant to be that guy, probably aren't going to be as good as what they'll actually be. You get a pretty good discount on them right now.
Well, plus he led the he led college football in tight ends for tight end touchdown receptions and yards per catch. So that's as a sophomore. So as a junior, he'll increase that, especially if Iowa on the outside can get better.
Yeah, take away some of the attention that gets thrown on him. Question: prediction for the number of sacks for AJ. That's totally going to depend on how many snaps they play, because he was really limited this past year. I think he starts, and I think he plays significant snap totals, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's Iowa that they limit him, because that was kind of what they did to most of the guys this past year. I know that infuriated part of the fan base that AJ was kind of limited, but I think the number that he has is going to be tied into the number of snaps, because limited, I think looking somewhere to like 6 to 8 is good. If you have him and Anthony Nelson go full go at defensive end, especially in pass rush situations, I think you could throw out double digits as a number there, but he's not going to hit that if he doesn't get the snaps.
You know what, though? Last year, I watched him as closely as you could, and I wasn't sold that. I mean, I know obviously he is going to be an NFL player and everything like that, but you could tell his technique wasn't. He was very natural, and he's as naturally talented as any player Iowa's had at that position, certainly since Adrian Claiborne. But he got gassed a lot of times, and good technique beat him at a lot of times. So I think he's going to play. He's going to have a major jump this year. You know, last year was on natural talent. This year, you know, weight room, learning the position again, continuous. I mean, I think the sky's the limit. That said, you know, Parker Hesse's a pretty good player too.
Yeah.
So they've got a lot of good players, and I don't think starting should be what people measure this as more as it's about snaps and productivity.
And I think for AJ, it's the percentage of snaps he's in what should be passing situations, whether it's a 1st and 10 and the opponent's down by 14, you know, in a fourth quarter, or it's a 3rd and 17. That's where he showed up the best and showed up the most. Yeah, the more progress he makes in the run defense, they'll get him on the field more. But his big impact, the biggest impact he makes was as a pass rusher. That's where he flashed. And the growth may come at the other spot with the run game, but it'll still show up there in the passing games. If he's not gassed, his natural ability as a pass rusher will kind of show and flash a little bit more, I think.
Right. We got just a couple more, and we got to get going here. We've got a couple things to do, but Ben brings up special teams need to get better to get back to Big Ten level. I agree. Punting has been suspect, and Desmond King was a heck of a kick returner. I thought the other parts of the game was better, and they have been better in the last few years versus about a 5 or 6 year gap there where they got de-pantsed all the time on punt fakes and onside kicks and everything like that. So I think they've been better on special teams, but certainly punting has to improve, and you want a little bit more game-breaking ability, and I think Amir Smith said is that way, definitely.
Yeah, it can be that. Josh Media hasn't had access to the new coach yet. My guess is signing day. I wouldn't be shocked if we get something there right afterwards, because basically, like all the rest of the coaches, boom, on the road, because the hiring happened either right before the January recruiting period started or a couple days afterwards. So he's got to finish talking to recruits period with everything there. And then Eric says, will Nixon be playing a lot of snaps this year on the D-line? Yes, and there's a high possibility he starts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Matt Nelson's out for the spring. Hurt his shoulder in the Pinstripe Bowl really late. And, Cedric Lattimore started early in the year. Davion Nixon's going to play a lot. So, well, thanks everyone so much for all your questions. We spent, 45 minutes of your time here with you, and we'll come back to you probably on signing day and break down the signing, the signing day, not the signings.
Yes.
And hopefully you'll enjoy that, and we will talk to you. Hopefully, I have some more information about other positions.
Yeah. So thanks everybody for all the questions and taking part. We'll talk to you next week.